Welcome to episode 3 of East 17th Street, a podcast by the Daily Hoosier. We're going to call this the Answers edition of the podcast.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Beautiful.
So we have seen two games that went exactly as expected for IU football through 2 weeks here. Week 3 at UCLA. It's the one that's been circled for, since the schedule came out. Guys, they came out with a line of Indiana minus, I think it opened 1.5. I've seen it as high as 3. First answer I want from you, Seth Tao, is what do you think of that point spread?
Well, it ties back into what I was also going to comment, that as much as we can say that everything was expected as we've seen, I mean, I thought I was going out on a limb by making a score pick of 63-7 for the Western Illinois game, but then they go and set program records with 77 points in a single game, 700 yards. I mean, it speaks just as much to both how well Indiana played that night and just how rough an opponent Western Illinois is, which we all knew coming in that's how that was going to be. But I mean, I think we had to see it with our own eyes to really, really grasp just the quality of opponent that they were facing. As far as the point spread, it's kind of an interesting place, because UCLA has only played one game so far and is coming off a bye. So it's just, there's not a ton of, and obviously Indiana's, played 2 games, but one of which is against one of the worst Division I football teams in the country at any level. So, there's not a ton of relevant data, I think, out there, because I think a lot of the statistical data you take from Indiana in week 2 is not really going to be relevant to what's going to happen against UCLA. And obviously UCLA has no data from week 2. So it's, you could put that spread anywhere from like Indiana +3 to Indiana -3 and make a decent case for it.
Yeah, I'm not the gambling type, but I do like to pay attention to point spreads because to me, it's like the most honest assessment of, what people really think is going to happen because people are putting their money on the line, and that kind of forces you to be honest. I certainly wouldn't have said in our predictions before the season substantiate this. I wouldn't have said that I thought that Indiana would be a 3-point-ish favorite going into this game. So I was definitely surprised, not only when the line opened, but when it kept growing. I wouldn't be surprised if, as the game time gets closer, you see that come down, just because people are going to kind of feel like, conventional wisdom says, based on historic performances by the program that Indiana is going to not win this game. But I agree, Seth. I think it's really hard to know what we have here. You've got an Indiana team that has done what we thought they would do. As you said, maybe more, but Western Illinois is such a hard team to read. In UCLA, they looked awful, in my opinion, at least in the first half. That they did what they had to do in the second half, but they trailed. I think it was 10-0 at halftime, trailed going into the fourth quarter at Hawaii, which is historically, not a good program either. And I think that plays into it as well. But some of the other interesting aspects of this game from a prediction standpoint, you got FPI, ESPN's metric, or one of their metrics, saying Indiana, last I checked, was around a 58% likelihood to win the game. They on ESPN's Football Power Index, that's FPI, they've increased from around 80th, 81st to open the season all the way down to 26th. And I think I commented when we did our preseason preview that, I thought that they didn't really have the algorithm right to measure a team like Indiana. And I'm not sure that they do after 2 weeks either. Like, I think the algorithm's probably getting really excited about that 77-3 score. I think the fact maybe that FIU, I don't know if you guys saw the score of their week 2 game, but they actually blew out Central Michigan. I think it was something in the neighborhood of like 52-16. I might be getting that wrong, but that probably factors into giving IU a boost as well.
I
ESPN's
want to say that
other
was Central Connecticut State. I think it was Central Connecticut State, not
Really?
Central Michigan.
okay, gotcha. Well, that might explain the score a little bit better. S&P
Actually,
Plus.
wait, no, it was Central Michigan. My bad.
Okay. S&P Plus is another ESPN metric. Indiana's gone up, roughly 25 spots there as well. But UCLA still picked to win, according to Bill Connolly's system there. I think I saw 26-23. I'll say if there's one thing I've learned about these two teams compared to preseason, I think I was the one that said on my prediction for this game that I expected a shootout. I would say I no longer expect a shootout in this game. I'm not sure the offense has shown me enough from either team to suggest that that's going to happen. But, Owen, you're going to go out there for the Daily Hoosier on Saturday. One of the things I'm really interested in this game is just what kind of environment it's going to be. UCLA plays at the Rose Bowl, which holds around 90,000, but I checked and they've only been averaging like in the 45 to 50,000 per game attendance in the last few years. And I think one of the reasons why I'm sure there's a multitude of reasons why, but they're students. This is an interesting thing about UCLA. Their campus is, I don't know the exact distance, but it's something like 20 miles away from the Rose Bowl. So it's not a real easy thing for students. It's not a campus stadium that they all just walk to on game day. So it's not a real convenient setup, but obviously there's a host of other reasons because they used to draw better historically. Owen, what are you looking for? What do you, as you go out there for the first time to the Rose Bowl, what are you gonna be looking for from a crowd standpoint?
Yeah, I'm curious. I think we kind of mentioned it either in the first two episodes what Indiana's crowd is going to look like.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be a little telling because I think there's a good chance a lot of people are actually going out to go see that game. Like it's been years since they've been to the Rose Bowl and since the 60s, and that opportunity doesn't come around very often. So I think Indiana's going to travel well. In terms of UCLA's kind of home, their crowd, I don't know. It's kind of up in the air, like you said. The campus is kind of not really near the stadium, so I don't know what the student section, how deep that is, if there is any at all. Because I mean, I don't know how. There's got to be some type of way that students get there, but it's probably not the most viable option with how busy of a city Los Angeles is and Pasadena is, and what it can be. But I think the important thing to know is this is their first Big Ten game. It's kind of historic in a sense. They don't really have a lot of history with Indiana specifically, but I think that's going to draw in a decent crowd. I think it's going to be maybe a new feeling for them. So I don't know. I think it'll be, I guess, their typical kind of home game, maybe a bit more. But I think the main thing to keep in mind is I think Indiana is going to travel pretty well in this one.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people ask me how do you get tickets for this game? My response has been I don't think you have to try very hard. You probably just go to UCLA's website. Don't buy tickets in the secondary market unless you're looking for a specific seat or a really good ticket. And it's as it's named, it's a bowl. It's most of the seats in the place are good. So I actually went to a game there and I think it was 2000 or 2001, the USC UCLA game. Carson Palmer was the quarterback for USC. So it was a long time ago. And they did draw really well for that game because it's obviously a big rivalry game. Little did I know all those years ago that I was watching a preview of the Big Ten as those two classic Pac-12 teams went head to head. I had a commenter on the website, and I should have substantiated this, but I'll just go ahead and throw it out there. Say that UCLA is on a quarter system, and the students aren't even on campus and in school right now. So I don't know if,
Wow.
if you guys know that, but like Seth, what do you think about like how big of a factor do you think this crowd is really going to be? And I guess segueing into, Kurt Signetti's takes about the crowd and going on the road and playing in that atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifics about UCLA's crowd, and I don't want to generalize, or I don't want to I don't want to sell them short. I don't want to oversell what that crowd could do. But anywhere you go, if a crowd is loud and engaged, it can be an impact. I think Owen made a good point that there's a decent chance that there could be a nice Indiana contingent at this game, whether it's people making the trip out from the Midwest or just IU alums or fans that already live out in the LA area and don't get to see Indiana football very often, if ever, in person. So, yeah, I think there's a chance there's a decent IU contingent there, especially when tickets may not be hard to come by in a big stadium that they don't always fill to begin with. But as far as Signetti, I mean, I don't think it really matters for him. It's funny because he kind of talks the talk so much, and he's like, oh, it's just a big stadium and we're going out there to play somebody and we're going to go out there and kick some ass and win. But then he was kind of followed up on Monday. Somebody else was like, well, what about the kids? Like, surely this is how you think, but for 18, 20-year-olds, like that could still be a big deal. And he's like, well, yeah, that's kind of my job, is I just have to block out the noise and keep them focused on the task at hand. And, this is really the first test that he'll have in that way, as IU's head coach. I mean, 2 back-to-back home games. And obviously there's been all the discussion about the crowds and everything at home games that he himself has kind of ignited. But this is the first real test he's had as far as the road game medal and just get in, get out, business trip, all that sort of stuff. Like let's see if he can walk the walk.
Yeah, I thought that response by Signetti provided a great insight into who he is as a head coach. He like you've been saying over and over, Seth, he does like to ignite the fan base, but that was the first time I really heard him say, okay, that is my job. And it has a very Nick Saban-esque flavor to it. Like he knows he's the CEO. He knows that it's his job above all else to keep his team focused on the task at hand and throw out all the distractions. Owen, you were there with Mikhail Kamara last night, and he even used the word poison, which I know where that's coming from. That's a Nick Saban term. I don't know if Saban coined it, but he's the guy that's famous for talking about rat poison, things, distractions like rankings and all that kind of stuff. And to hear Kamara say that in a media availability, that Signetti has, picked up, maybe he's not using the exact same words and phrases, but he models himself in that specific regard after Saban very, very much. So I think when I heard him say that, he's told us over and over, he's not a guy that, likes to be rah-rah and, speak to the team every game or every day, every week. But I think he's going to probably make a more significant appearance here over the next few days as he gets his team ready to go out there. And I think, you look at, as we kind of transition here to what we've seen out of Indiana, and I opened with, getting answers about this team. Owen, is there anything you've seen out of Indiana through the first 2 weeks, kind of filtering out the noise of the opponents? Is there anything that is actually surprising that you do feel like you've learned about this team that you weren't quite expecting going into the season?
I think we discussed maybe a lot of rotation throughout, I guess, a lot of positional groups. I think mainly the offense, it does take place. Ellison and Lawton kind of split snaps at back in the first 2 games, and a lot of different personnel and receivers. But I think the defensive side remains fairly consistent when you're not looking at the defensive line. Defensive line kind of rotate in and out sometimes, and then they'll have some personnel where Isaiah Jones comes in along with Walker and Fisher. So I guess when Indiana's at full strength and they're probably going to face, the quality opponent in UCLA this upcoming week, I don't think they're going to, rotate really deep with defensive backs or linebackers that much. You'll see the usual rotation you have at the defensive line, but I guess I was expecting a little bit more. I was expecting maybe Darius Doss to get more snaps at like nickel corner position, maybe some more rotation on outside corner, filtering in, Jamari Sharp and others in that position. But kind of like that, DBs and most of the time linebackers have stayed pretty consistent throughout their drives in the first half and in that second half in the FIU game when they were still playing their starters.
Yeah, and speaking of rotations, I think Indiana's going to get a little bit of a break, and I guess you're going to get a little of a break too, Owen, because I think the Southern California was going through a heat wave with temperatures north of 100 as highs for several. I don't know
Yes.
if it was days, weeks. It was a long time, and they've dipped back down to what I would call more traditional Southern California weather with right around 80. Probably be pretty ideal at
Yeah.
kickoff. So, you think if the temperatures had stayed up there, Indiana would have had no choice but to rotate very heavily just to keep everybody fresh. Seth, what about you in regards to that same question? Is there anything about this team, 2 weeks in that you have really been surprised by?
Well, I'll at least start tying back to some of the personnel stuff that Owen was talking about. And I think, at least personnel-wise, there's probably two things that caught my and other people's attention. One has been talked about a little bit more than the others. The one that immediately catches everybody's attention, and obviously the injury has, thrown wrenches into it, was Omar Cooper being the starter ahead of Donovan McCulley.
Right.
At wide receiver was interesting. And look, Omar Cooper's played really well the last couple weeks. So, I mean, it's hard to say that it isn't deserved. Obviously, like I said, McCulley getting injured against FIU, we haven't really seen a ton of, he didn't play last week, so we haven't seen enough of him in game mode to really maybe make a fair comparison. But I mean, it's hard to say Omar Cooper hasn't looked the part the last couple weeks in that starter's role. And yeah, but that was really interesting. The other personnel thing that's been surprising to me is pretty much all camp, it seemed like at defensive tackle, it was going to be James Carpenter and CJ West, these two big bodies just right up the middle, clogging things up. And CJ West hasn't really been out there that much. It's been Marcus Burris Jr. that's been the starter alongside Carpenter, and even Tyreek Tucker. Tyreek Tucker's played very well too. But he was expected to be more of a rotation piece. He's played more snaps than CJ West has, and it's not like West has been on the injury report or anything. So I'm really interested. I don't really know what's going on there. Like if something happened, because I mean, it's not like we were just talking. CJ West was lined up with the ones for most of fall camp. So I don't really know what's going on there. If something happened up game week of the FIU game, or maybe it was just kind of smoke and mirrors, or in fall camp for the parts that were open to the media. I don't really know, but it's really interesting because CJ West was expected to be a real big part of this defense, and he hasn't been out there enough, compared to the other guys on the defensive line. As far as, maybe more broad topics or something that may have surprised me, I think I've been decently impressed with the offensive line so far on the whole. I mean, against FIU, like the pass blocking, seemed a little bit of a concern, but then I went back and watched the tape of some of that stuff, and it seemed like all the pressures from that game were really coming from a couple spots on the offensive line. And it's not, and obviously, one weak link on the offensive line can make the whole group look bad. And it was Trey Wettig that had a really tough game that day. And honestly, I think if there's anybody on the line you'd want that, that to have happened to, you'd probably say, okay, like if it's Wettig or if it's Mike Kadick, you feel fine about it because those are veteran guys that, can probably pull it together and kind of figure things out. Like you'd rather it be them than have, I think Drew Evans didn't have a great game against FIU either, but I mean, it was really a lot of Wettig stuff coming from the right tackle spot as far as the pressure. And, Bray Lynch looked really good, graded out really well in that game. And Carter Smith has been fantastic. And so, and really, the grades aside, as far as all that, I mean, it's hard to watch this team and not be impressed with the run blocking so far. I mean, the running backs have played really well, and Lawton and Ellison and Elijah Green have capitalized on the opportunities, but I mean, just the gaping holes that have been opened for these running backs by the Indiana offensive line have been really, really impressive. And obviously, you have to factor in the quality of opponents that they played. Not to knock anything against FIU, but the quality of opponents that they played relative to what they're going to see in the Big Ten. You have to remember that. But I think for an offensive line that it was going to be a really big year for the offensive line. That the type of year that group. I mean, you could say that about any football team, but really with this Indiana team, like that group can be the X factor that kind of determines how good this IU team can be overall. And I think you have to be pretty encouraged about what you've seen in the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, one thing that's really interesting to me about Wedig is, if you go back and look at his Wisconsin career, I think there was some, I don't know if it's frustration is the right word, but he was being moved around between tackle and the interior. And, obviously to some extent that means that Wisconsin thought he was a better fit at guard than tackle because he wanted to play tackle. And I think he was pretty vocal about that. And so you see him struggle in week 1 at tackle, and it at least makes you wonder, what is he going to look like as these games get more difficult? Because if he's struggling against FIU, it could be a bigger concern down the road. But I do agree with your sentiment that he's a guy that's a veteran. Maybe he was just dinged up a little bit in week 1 dealing with something. You never know. It's dangerous to overreact to one game.
First game in a new program.
Yeah, absolutely. I did also notice CJ West snap count being lower than what I would have expected, but I do wonder if they're kind of just keeping his snap count low intentionally. Like, do you really need a guy of that size to stop the run against FIU and Western Illinois? I'd say probably not.
Probably not, but then that would almost beg the question of then why wouldn't you be doing that with James Carpenter too, or some of these other bigger defensive, these other defensive guys that you like Aiden Fisher, if you're gonna play that game with CJ West, like why would you not be doing that with everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a story there, but it's no doubt true that he played less than I think everyone expected for the first couple of weeks. So we'll see if that changes out at UCLA. What about quarterbacks? I mean, I thought, and Curtis Rourke, look, I mean, he looked great against Western Illinois, but I've tried really hard to not analyze anything about that game. Guys were wide open, with 5 yards of separation down the field on some of those big plays. But conversely, I thought his struggles against FIU, if he was struggling at times, was because of, as we already mentioned, there was a lot of quicker than expected penetration around the edge. So I'm not really sure what to take from his first 2 weeks right now. I think, if I have a concern with Curtis Rourke right now, it's his legs. Like I think everything's going to have to happen really quick from here on out. Say for the Charlotte game, he's gonna have to make quick decisions in the pocket, and I think he's going to be okay with that. But if the decision is to run, I'm not sure how comfortable I am that things are going to happen that aren't favorable to IU in that regard. I guess Owen, what are you, when you watch Rourke through 2 weeks, what are you taking away from him that's positive and negative so far?
Yeah, I agree with you. For the first 2 games, I think you could say, especially in the Western Illinois game, he did everything he was supposed to do. Like, I think that's the best way to put it. He had a few really good throws to Anderson Kobe, that first touchdown of the game, which, I mean, that was a sight to see. And he had an opportunity to get another one earlier in the FIU game. So I guess that was an adjustment, and he kind of made that happen. But I'm on the same boat with you, Mike. I think the legs, I know he had the stats at Ohio where he was able to scramble out of the pocket and make some plays with his legs, but I don't know. It's just it's a little faster. It's gonna, like you said, it's gonna get faster with Big Ten. There's gonna be a lot of more pressure on him. And when that pocket collapses, you know, I don't know if you really want that liability of him getting out of the pocket and using his legs, and you know, stuff can happen, especially when QBs get hit. So I don't know, but I will go back and say I think he did everything right in the Western Illinois game. I think he did make some adjustments from that first FIU game, but again, you know, the quality of opponent is something you have to keep in mind. I will say he talked about this a lot the first 2 weeks. His calm presence, I think in the huddle and before plays, I think is going to go a long way. It kind of shows that, you know, he's taken this transition to the big stage kind of a lot better than what maybe, you know, some might have thought. And I think having that kind of, you know, veteran mantra, I guess, and just knowing that you have a quarterback leader who's going to be calm in those big moments, and even in week one, you know, big moments meaning like first week home games against not the best opponent, but still with a big crowd in the area. I think Cignetti's going to like that, and I think if that stays consistent through the season, I think that's also going to go a long way.
Seth, I want to get your reaction to Rourke as well as Taven Jackson, who are all, you know, I'm probably being unfair to Rourke, not giving him credit in the first 2 weeks, and overly fair to Jackson by saying I was really impressed by him when he did get to come into the game very briefly. I mean, by the same token, I don't think anybody doubts Taven Jackson's talent. It's, you know, is he going to be consistent over the course of a full game? That was clearly the issue last year. You know, he had really special moments like the second half against Louisville, but you know, he also had head scratching moments, and it's just kind of putting it all together. But his talent, you know, just his mobility, you know, speaking to that mobility issue, he's clearly got better feet than Rourke, and he was making some throws like, you know, throwing like, you know, going one way, throwing the other, very accurate, you know, doing things that, you know, you have to be a really talented guy to do. I'll continue. I said this before the season, and I'll continue to say, I do think, you know, a lot of times you lose your starter and your season's shot. You know, I wouldn't feel that way if something did happen to Rourke.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much said the same thing during fall camp too, that I thought Taven, you know, having spent a full year covering IU with Taven and obviously Brendan Sorsby at quarterback, but, you know, watching Taven battle with Sorsby and, you know, having spent time, you know, I thought Taven looked a lot better in camp this year than he did last year, you know, both spring and fall. I thought he looked better than he did last year. I mean, not necessarily that he looked better than Rourke or that he was the best quarterback there, but I thought he looked a lot better, and he at least looks like a guy that, should something happen to Rourke, Indiana can feel like they have at the very least a competent backup. Now, like, I'm not going to take too much away from his performance against Western Illinois because there were acres of space for his receivers. I mean, I think he only actually completed like he only attempted like 3 or 4 total passes, I think, in the game. And his one touchdown pass to Omar Cooper, he actually underthrew that ball, but he didn't hit Cooper in stride down the field, but Cooper had so much space that he was able to slow up a little bit, catch the ball, and still beat everybody to the end zone. So it didn't really matter, but that's not going to show up in the stat sheet, obviously. But as far as Curtis, so yeah, I mean, I think Taven Jackson, I mean, it's not like Indiana's going to bench Curtis Rourke by any means,
right?
But he at least looks like a guy that you could feel pretty solid about for the future at this point. And you would probably feel a little different about Taven and his reps and all of that, like that you see if he kind of played as a redshirt freshman might have otherwise normally played last year, just kind of sparingly, like the way that we'll see Indiana, you know, like we saw Tyler Cherry and Alberto Mendoza come in at the end of the Western Illinois game. Like if we hadn't seen Taven be out there as a redshirt freshman having to make, you know, and the issue was never really talent. It was kind of the decision making. Right. The decision making was the big issue. And that's just got, you know, you can have the talent, but sometimes you just need to age and kind of learn at the college level to really get that decision making down. So, you know, those reps, you know, last year might benefit him down the road, but I think we might feel a little differently about or the public might feel a little differently about Taven if he hadn't been out there all last year making not great decisions in front of our eyes. As far as Curtis Rourke, I mean, I mostly agree with what you guys are saying. I think the numbers the last couple of years, he has been an effective runner at Ohio. It's important to remember that he hurt his knee. He had an ACL tear at the end of his 2022 season where he was MAC Player of the Year and came back and still, rushed for 3.3 yards per carry, which, for a quarterback whose mobility is not his number one asset, you'll take that where you're getting, 219 yards on the ground with 4 touchdowns for Carter Schwartz. You'd be pretty pleased with that output. I think that was a more efficient rushing output than Brendan Sorsby had for IU last year. And we also, Sorsby would put the ball on the ground a lot, but he was at least a guy that you felt good about running the ball. That was one of his better assets. But yeah, I mean, Rourke, the decision making has mostly been fine. I think he's like we've said, he's mostly been as advertised so far. I think he's the veteran guy that has not put the ball in harm's way very much, if at all. He has a couple times, like the Miles Cross one-handed circus catch against FIU, but he almost had no choice but to put that ball where he did. The concern from there was, I think, we talked about the pressure that he faced. He did fumble the ball a couple times, put the ball on the ground. That can't continue to happen. But otherwise he's relatively steady. He's, his throws are not always perfect. I think I'm still waiting to see if Indiana, if we get to a point in the season where Indiana is going to say, okay, Curtis, we need you to win this game for us, in the air, we need you to make the plays, lead us on this game-winning drive, all in the air. The ground game is gone. We need Curtis Rourke to win this game with his arm. Can he do that for Indiana? I still cannot with certainty say yes, but I can't with certainty say no. I think that's kind of the big question that I have out there. I think he's a guy that can get the ball to Indiana's playmakers pretty reliably and give them a chance to do things. But if Indiana needs Rourke to be the guy to go win them the game, is he going to be able to do it? I don't know yet.
And speaking of uncertainty, I feel like if there's one unit on this team that I feel like I just still don't know anything about, and Owen, you rightly pointed this out in your story that's on the Daily Hoosier right now, it's the secondary. Indiana has not really faced a good quarterback to this point. Their front seven has been getting home, generating a lot of pressure, a ton of sacks, ton of tackles for loss. The secondary has not been under a lot of stress to this point. And, Kurt Signetti's talked a little bit about that. He says there's been mistakes on the back end, and you don't even know if those mistakes are, look, we made a mistake, but we were so good on the front end that it didn't even get exposed or recognized. It might be just something that they're seeing when they watch the all 22 film, and you never even see it as a factor in the game. But, I think Indiana is in a good spot with D'Angelo Pons. I think, Jameer Johnson is somebody that gained the trust of the staff as fall camp went on. Guy who's going home this weekend, by the way. He's a Pasadena, California native. Jameer Johnson is. But beyond those two, there's an injury with JoJo Johnson. He's been, I think he was upgraded from out to questionable. Would seem like he would see some snaps if he was healthy. The safeties, I feel like Sanguinetti's been playing better than what we've seen in recent years, especially from a tackling standpoint. I always felt like that was his issue. But I guess my question, Owen, is, and I don't even know if that's going to happen this week based on what we saw from UCLA's passing game. But, when Indiana faces their first really dangerous quarterback, and that could be a long way away as I think about it. But what degree of comfort do you have that these guys are going to be up to the task?
Yeah, right now I don't know, to be completely honest with you, because like you said, you can't judge anything, especially off those first 2 games. When they were tested, they looked fine, but the 2 quarterbacks that they faced, those are not high quality quarterbacks that are going to make some miraculous throws most of the time. So I think that's something you have to keep in mind with that group. And also kind of, you have to kind of think if they're not getting tested early on in the season, then what happens when they do face that that good quarterback, and just, that's a huge question mark. So I mean, they've looked fine. Nothing was blaring. Of course, you said Signetti said that there were some mistakes on the back end, but we couldn't really see anything big happen in either of those games. So I think something to keep in mind is those two drives that each team had towards the end of the first half. I think they exposed a little bit of some, not just some problems with the entire defense, but also with the secondary. That touchdown that FIU had, someone was wide open. So that was a mistake you have to kind of recognize even against that quality opponent. So I think when they do get to that big opponent, it's just going to come down to, have they had the preparation to kind of perform in that game and kind of do their best to limit the damage that quarterback may have. I think the first one that comes to mind, I think Nebraska's kind of middle of the schedule. I think Dylan Raiola has looked really nice in these first two games, especially the one that he led the win against Colorado. But it's a group that we don't know too much about. I think they'll get some tests in Pasadena, and they'll get tested, and we'll get kind of maybe a more nuanced answer as to how they performed. But it's kind of just up in the air right now.
And Seth, UCLA, their quarterback Ethan Garbers is, he's a veteran guy. He's been around for 4 years, but he hasn't played a ton throughout his career, and didn't look good against Hawaii at all. Really, two interceptions, no points in the first half. I'm sure you haven't been, pouring through game film of UCLA, but based on what you do know about the guy, is he at least better than what Indiana's seen so far from a quarterback standpoint? He pretty much has to be, doesn't he?
I was going to say, I don't think I need to pour through much tape to answer that question and say yes, that this will still be. And because you have to remember also, it's not only the quarterback and the pure talent, it's also the scheme that you're going to play against and who's calling the plays and all that. And you look at the coaching staffs that Indiana played against the first 2 weeks, and now all of a sudden you're going up against Eric Bieniemy, offensive coordinator, who was calling play. He wasn't calling plays for Patrick Mahomes, but he was, the offensive coordinator for Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, was just calling plays in the NFL last year and trying to make it work in Washington with Sam Howell and doing what he had to do there, obviously. So, calling it at the highest level, like he comes in from the highest level. Like it's just a night and day from what Indiana has already seen in the secondary. I do want to clarify at least like on those couple drives at the end of the half. Those are definitely the biggest concern with the defense. But I wrote about this on the site a couple days ago. Those two drives went actually very differently. Like kind of when you pour through the tape, like I think it seemed to me like against Western Illinois, Bryant Haynes just called that very conservatively, had them sit back in zone most of that time and allowed them to kind of, find the soft spots and just do what they needed to do, like without bringing really any pressure against Western Illinois. And I'm guessing that's how Indiana's coaching staff approached that whole game from a play calling standpoint. There was no reason to put anything on tape from that game that could, come back to bite them later in the season. Like you could, I don't know if obviously you need a little luck to get up to 77 points, but you could get quite a bit of points on the board against an opponent like that while keeping it very vanilla from a play calling perspective. And there's no reason to put things on tape against an opponent like that. But so I'm thinking that it looks like Bryant Haynes just had them kind of sitting back in zone most of the time. And now there were a few individual mistakes as well that kind of led to Western Illinois getting the field goal. I think even Curt Cignetti accepted a penalty that he made, or declined a penalty that he maybe should have accepted. And obviously when it was already 42-0, it doesn't really matter. But, if that was to happen this week, that might be something that you circle and look back to if it's a decision that went awry. So, I mean, no one was really absolved of blame in that sense in terms of letting Western Illinois get down the field. But it's just interesting because the week before, it's not like it was the same thing happening both weeks. The week before against Florida International, Bryant Haynes was still kind of bringing a lot of blitzes, like bringing 5-man rushes instead of just the usual 4. Would bring sometimes a 6-man. Like, he would bring pressure, and you're obviously facing a different quarterback because FIU's quarterback was really mobile and could really beat you out of the pocket and kind of turn things around on you really quickly. And that's actually what happened. Like, they were bringing pressure from the edge and bring a lot of pressure. And I don't know if it was the sideline for FIU or if it was the quarterback that was just kind of checking out of things, but they just were able to drum up some plays to really beat that pressure really quickly, just get some quick looks to kind of negate the defensive line completely out of the play. And that's how that guy ended up wide open on that touchdown, was that they had pressure coming off the edge and they just sent the guy on the wheel route right around that pressure. And there was just nobody left because they were bringing a rush. So, it's a concern, but it almost should make you feel, I think, a little bit better that it wasn't like necessarily the exact same things happening both weeks.
Right.
It was kind of different. There were individual mistakes and some missed tackles and missed assignments or whatever that led to both those scoring drives and contributed to the breakdowns there. But the fact that it was kind of different things and different schemes and things like that led to that happening, I think should make you feel a little better and a little less like, oh, this is something that's really going to bog down Indiana in Big Ten play.
Right. I know we're running up against a stop here, so we can get Owen back to class. So I wanna revisit real quick our predictions for this UCLA game. As I said earlier, I predicted a shootout. I said 34-31 UCLA. We all predicted UCLA to win in a close game. I am gonna pull back my prediction and say that it's going to be 24-21. But as of right now, I'm going to be a coward and say I don't know who's going to win the game by that score. But I think it's going to be more along the lines of that kind of game coming down to the wire. What about you, Seth? As you shake your head at me, are you sticking with 27-24 UCLA?
I feel like I have to. Like we've said all along, like it's just hard to really take too much from what these teams have done so far. Right. Because I'd be basically right off week 2 for both teams, because UCLA didn't play in week 2 and Indiana played the worst team that either of these two teams will play all season in week 2. So I feel like you have to write that off. And then if this was basically week 2, you would probably be taking a similar approach to where, you take a little bit from week 1, but you don't want to overdo it when you're playing, teams like Hawaii and Florida International. So I don't really want to back off of the prediction I made before. I think we all said that this was a game that we could see going either way, and I could easily see Indiana winning this game. And I think I'd be surprised if either team won this game by 10 points or more. But
Same.
I don't think there's any reason. I don't think I've seen anything so overwhelming from either side to say, okay, I need to scrap what I said before.
What about you, Owen?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I haven't seen any glaring problems with either team to really, back down on my prediction. I'll stick with the same one. I think I had 28-24 in favor of UCLA.
Yep. Yeah.
Maybe a smaller score, maybe 24-21, like you were saying. But I mean, that's kind of the same boat. So
I very much believe that we're going to be watching this game with keen interest late in the fourth quarter. I think it's going to be one of those kind of games. And to the last here, looking ahead, if Indiana is to somehow pull out this game, go to 3-0, we all think they'll go to 4-0 after that. Looking ahead to the second and third Big Ten games, Northwestern's already made a quarterback change. Maryland has already lost at home to Michigan State. Can we even talk about 6-0 Indiana? It seems more likely than it was before the season. Is that reasonable to even posit that that's on the table, Seth?
Yeah, I mean, it could be based on everything you just said. Like you still tend to think that those are games that could go either way. Yep. Indiana, especially we haven't seen Indiana on the road yet, so that'll factor in with Northwestern and their unique venue. But between that and like you say about Maryland losing to Michigan State was really, really surprising. So I'm not sure exactly what to think about those two teams right now, but I mean, I agree. I think 6-0 is probably more, would I say that I favor them to go 6-0?
Right.
know, but would I? Is it more likely? I don't know how much more likely, but I think it's more likely.
And Owen, if that were to happen, they're 6-0. I think that means they would be playing Nebraska, who has a great traveling fan base. What would the scene be like at Memorial Stadium for that game? Could be like an ESPN game day,
I
actually.
mean, yeah,
And that'd be homecoming.
Yeah.
Yes, if Nebraska continues to do what they're doing too, that would be sold out. I would think so. I mean, that's a sellout, and I think it would also be a packed house. I mean,
Both teams
like
would
Seth
probably
said,
be in the top 20 too.
yeah, it's a very big chance that Indiana can go into that week 6-0.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up right there on that very positive note, and we'll find out very soon how hysterical
Give
or
the
not
fans
that.
what they want.
Yeah, we'll find out if we're
Always.
crazy or not for even bringing up that topic. Seth and Owen, appreciate your time. We'll catch you all on the next episode.